Welcome to Jazz Zone Together, our new online community providing educational and classroom resources and interviews with artists, celebrities, and jazz educators, as well as valuable teaching tips and repertoire suggestions. Today, we're pleased to welcome noted jazz educator, author, and trombone performer Tony Garcia. Tony currently serves as Director of Jazz Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University. He is also a long-standing board member of the Midwest Clinic, among other things. Now I'll turn over the mic to Dick Dunscomb to conduct the interview with Tony. Dick, it's all yours.
Thank you, Bob. Hey, Tony, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Well, it's great to see you, and I know we're separated by many miles between the three of us, but it's a great reunion. And I was thinking back to when I first met you, or at least I'm not sure if I even met you in 1987, but I first learned of you in person in 1987 when I attended my first NAJE conference. I think you were president at the time. It was in Atlanta, and that was the beginning of decades of learning from you. And Bob, also, I mean, all the publications that I've had the pleasure of learning from and using with students that Bob has edited over the decades. And then he's also, if I recall correctly, he was responsible in part for freeing up some of the rights to tunes that I used in my book, Cutting the Changes. So I'm indebted to both of you for all that you've done for me and for my students over the years.
Well, thank you. I am proud to call you not only a friend, but a colleague throughout the years. Tony, you've done a great service to the education and particularly jazz education agendas.
Thanks.
Growing up, what was behind your driving force that led you to choose music as a career path?
Well, I chose my parents carefully, as I like to say. I was born and raised in New Orleans, which is not a bad head start. And my parents weren't musicians, but they loved music there. And my dad brought a certain amount of Puerto Rican music into the house, and my mom loved big bands. And then we were surrounded by New Orleans jazz, even though I was mostly hearing it on television and the radio. And you guys know that AM radio back in the day was great and in varied genres all the time. And in New Orleans, especially so. So in New Orleans, I had all these great musical influences, not only from around the world, but from, you know, the New Orleans music in the French Quarter, all appearing on radio and on television. And so of the 6 kids, three of them actually not only, I mean, everybody studied piano and stuff, but 3 of the kids actually went in for music degrees. And now balance that with the fact that there are a lot of reasons why I was a late starter. And even though I was interested in music, I gave up piano lessons when I was probably something like 7 or 8 or something, because they were opposite the Superman Batman hour on television. There were no DVRs or VCRs, and I had my priorities. I'm like, this is not working out. I'm missing Batman and Superman. I gave up piano lessons. I had severe allergies and asthma throughout my teen years. And actually, I just came from my latest allergy shot. I've had 3 nose operations. There was no instrumental music at my elementary school at all. I didn't start trombone till I was 13. We didn't have a jazz band of our own at our high school till my senior year. I don't think I'd ever heard of Miles Davis or Charlie Parker until I entered as a freshman jazz major at Loyola University. I didn't play my first decent jazz solo on the trombone until 2 years after I graduated as a jazz major at Loyola University. At that point, I was finally a graduate student at Eastman. I didn't get into Eastman the first time I applied. I got in the second time I applied, and that was not for playing. It was for a writing major, which opened up the doors for not only my writing, but eventually my playing. So I like to tell my students that I'm the poster child for late development in jazz studies, and prove that if someone wants to learn, they can learn, that I'm here to help them. And those challenges for a dozen years on the trombone and in jazz in general really allowed me later to figure out how much I love teaching, because I did not want to teach. Hadn't figured out how to teach myself. I didn't want to screw up the next generation. And after a dozen years of trying and eventually getting to the point where I could not only learn from my teachers better, but teach myself, I realized that I had experienced almost every problem that every jazz musician had experienced, whether it was breathing and articulation, or whether it was improvisation, or whether it was writing. And I had gotten to the other side. I had done the journey, and it made me a much stronger teacher when I finally started teaching in my second year at Eastman as a grad student, running the 4th jazz band there. I realized I was effective and I really enjoyed it and I didn't want to stop. So I pivoted my entire career goals from being a full-time player that I had been before I went to Eastman, playing in New Orleans, sometimes over 400 things a year, to being a teacher who plays whenever he can, but loves teaching, you know, and of course, continuing to write. So it's been quite a journey.
Well, we're all benefiting from that. Thank you for
Thank
making
you.
that
Very kind.
We know that you have had some teachers, as you referred to, that helped you uh, when you were in school and beyond. Share with us some of the most influential mentors and teachers that you've encountered along the way.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, I'm doing whatever I can to help, but the people who helped me just did amazing work in opening up music and jazz in particular. So, you know, I had wonderful teachers in high school with Marion Kaluta, whose son is actually running that high school's jazz band right now and band program, and Logan Boudreau. These were folks who were dedicated to music education in high school. At Loyola, I was lucky to study with Dick Erb, who was a bass trombonist with the New Orleans and later Louisiana Philharmonic, who was able to help me tremendously in terms of sound production. John Mahoney was a role model for me. He came in my sophomore year, you know John, and he came in my sophomore year as someone who was probably only a decade or 15 years older than I. And he played trombone, played keyboards, scat sang, and you know, wrote charts, which pretty much ended up being what I did for the rest of my career. So he was remarkable in opening things up for me. And he was the person who said, you know, after I graduated from undergrad, he said, you know, I can't really recommend you to grad school as a player because you're not strong enough. And I wasn't at the time as an improviser. He says, but I think I can recommend you as a writer. And I had never thought of that. And because of that, I got eventually into that and studying it. And that opened me up as a player as well as a writer. When I got to Eastman, I had benefited, of course, from Ray Wright, the great mentor there, and Bill Dobbins, who is still teaching there, and George Osborne, who was a tremendous trombonist and teacher, and was at that time the principal of the Rochester Philharmonic, and was able to help me out. And my teacher's teacher, Dick Erb's teacher, Arnold Jacobs, the acclaimed guru of breathing, I managed to study with in a couple of times in 1980 and 1982, who in a matter of minutes permanently changed my my whole outlook on how to play a wind instrument, and made it possible for me to really understand what I needed to do to teach myself. And then, of course, there's every musician I've ever played with who's taught me so much, and every musician I've ever hosted. And often, as I'm sure you know, you host musicians to teach not only the students, but yourself. And so, I mean, what a great gig. I get to hire these world-class musicians to teach me. I mean, my name's Garcia, but I didn't grow up in Puerto Rico. I call myself Isle Rican because I'm half Iowan and half Puerto Rican. There are 6 Isle Ricans on the planet that I know of, my 5 siblings and I. And so I didn't understand Afro-Cuban music or whatever. And so, but when I got to start teaching, I got to hire Tito Puente. I got to hire Danilo Perez. I got to hire the keyboard player, Eddie Palmieri. I get to hire these people, much less all the great jazz and bebop musicians and writers and producers, the rest. So I've benefited from all those. And then, of course, I learn all the time from my students who challenge me, especially with whatever's going on in the current and the near future, to try to find out what's relevant, what's important, and how I can get them to their careers. So, you know, I'm just constantly learning. I'm grateful that I'm in a career where I can keep stealing from the best.
That's good. You know, it's interesting, Tony, that we have such a wonderful relationship with the professional players in our genre, and they have all become involved in one way or another with the educational process. But we see those programs that are successful are incorporating the masters into it and the masters' way of playing and teaching.
Oh, it's really true. You've got to go back to the actual musicians who are at the forefront of either the roots of the music or advancing the music to another level, wherever it is. And you've got to share those with your students so that they can see it coming straight from the horse's mouth. I'm just the middleman.
I think that that's a real lesson for beginning jazz educators and those new to jazz education. That's really the beginning point is as you have described it, rather than the latest pop tunes to play with their jazz bands.
Sure. And the other thing is that you don't have to wait to bring in a wonderful guest artist because you were waiting for your program or your ensemble to reach some profound level in order to justify joining them with an artist. You bring them in when your band is struggling, when your program is beginning, and whatever, because they will help elevate it and bring such excitement to the students that your program will grow exponentially quicker because you brought in someone from the front end. So I can't agree more.
Indeed. Now, as a trombonist, bass trombonist, and pianist, you have also had an extensive touring and performing career. Give us a few of the most memorable moments of that part of your life.
Wow. Well, again, it's a bit of name dropping, I guess. But I was again, in New Orleans, I was so fortunate because in New Orleans, just the New Orleans jazz musicians, there's, traditional New Orleans jazz, and there's mainstream jazz, and there's bebop, and there's avant-garde jazz, and there's bluegrass, and there's country, and there's rock and roll, and there's R&B, and house music now, and rap, and all of that exists all at the same time in that city. And it also does here in Richmond. It's one of the reasons I moved here. Probably talk about later, but so in New Orleans, as an 18 to 25-year-old, much less earlier, and getting a chance to be exposed as a young working musician to play with great soul and R&B players or whatever, or to be hired to tour with. I remember Sam Walton of Walmart, the richest guy in America at the time, hired me to tour Southern Louisiana with Jana Jay, a fiddler, on trombone and with a horn section. And I thought, like, what am I doing? But it was great because I got to learn all kinds of things about the country music idiom that I'd never figured out before. I was then thrown into the middle of it as a trombone, which of course is a hallmark of the country music profession, and really get a chance to learn from people. And I was being paid by the richest man in America to learn, so these opportunities came to me in a way that I don't know if they would have if I hadn't grown up in New Orleans. But besides the fact that there were the New Orleans musicians, then there were all these artists who would come to New Orleans, and I would get hired to back them up, largely through the referrals of either musicians who were somewhat older than me or my teachers, like Joe Hebert, who I didn't even mention, who was a great director of bands and founded the jazz program at Loyola. And Joe and John Mahoney would refer me, apparently when everyone else who owned a trombone was busy and working, and I owned a trombone, and they would recommend me when I was 19 to play. And that was incredible experience. I mean, I was playing in the New Orleans Saints football team band on the sidelines when I was 19 in front of 80,000 people and sight reading because there were no rehearsals. And so this was an amazing experience. But the touring shows that would come through, and it's probably where the name dropping comes in, but I mean, if you get a chance to play 50 shows with Ella Fitzgerald, how can you not learn? I mean, she would come for 2-week runs, 2 shows a night, and then there would be occasional other things for like a NAMM show or something else that would come into town. And she'd be backed up by like Keeter Betts and Bobby Durham or Mickey Roker and Paul Smith on the piano. Oh my God, to be paid to try to, to fit in with a big band and play the same music that the Count Basie band recorded with her, or that Sammy Nestico had arranged for her, or whatever. I mean, incredible experience, and to say nothing of learning about her professionalism and her graciousness and her, killer musicianship. So those kinds of opportunities. I got 2-week runs with at like the Fairmont Hotel chain in the Blue Room, like they had the Gold Room, I think in San Francisco, or the Venetian Room elsewhere. And I got 2-week runs playing backup with like Mel Torme and George Shearing, great artists. Sometimes, like Billy Eckstine, Charlie Parker and Miles Davis were in Billy Eckstine's band. Gladys Knight and the Pips and the Four Tops and the Temptations and the Spinners, great R&B groups, people like that, Crystal Gale, etc. And then there were the one-offs that would come to town, like our mutual friend and our people that we admire, Doc Severance and Louis Belson and people like that. And then there were other groups that would come to town, like the New Orleans, the New York Metropolitan Opera Company would come, and I get to play in the orchestra. And then, of course, things like shows that would come to town, like the Tap Dance Kid and Annie and Singing in the Rain, and then the circus. oh my God, 2 weeks playing tenor trombone on the circus, 2 weeks playing bass trombone with the circus. And I learned so much about how to play the trombone that I never would have done in college, because it's impossible to play circus gallops without developing some technique that perhaps didn't come up in, sophomore year. So those kinds of experiences were great. And then in my older years, in the 90s, I got a chance. Dave Brubeck came to town to do a concert of his sacred works with orchestra and chorus. And I got to play the only trombone part in the orchestra, which is like a 3.5 octave spanning part. Used my tenor and bass trombones and backed that up for a few days. And he, of course, was one of my heroes. And then I got to record and tour for 2 months in the United States and Europe with Phil Collins, a big band that he put together because his dream was to be Buddy Rich for decades. And so he put together his big band, and I was honored to be able to play in a group with a horn section that was put together by my friend and colleague Ron Modell, who had founded the jazz program at Northern Illinois University. By this time I was at Northwestern, but Ron called me because he knows I love to play bass trombone in a big band. And lo and behold, we ended up doing a wonderful tour and a recording with Phil. So, I mean, that stuff is a dream come true. And then all of that experience and knowledge, of course, goes into firsthand information when I teach my own students, or when I go elsewhere as a clinician, because I have performed extensively as a performing trombonist or bass trombonist, and sometimes as a pianist. And so I can share that knowledge, directly. It's not coming out of a book. I know what it takes to get it done. But the thrill of learning and participating in those live experiences is something that will never be replaced. I mean, that's just an amazing experience, as you well know, because you've fronted and hosted and played with and directed so many great artists.
Well, Tony, I remember seeing you with the Phil Collins Big Band in Montreux.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing to me is the variation between your career in New Orleans and being on the road with a band. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, yeah, it was always a push-pull for me, because I was in New Orleans, let's say I was 20, 25, et cetera, and offers would come in to tour elsewhere. And, say go up the riverboat and go up to St. Louis or whatever and do things on a riverboat, or occasionally to join a big band, and, like say a Glenn Miller orchestra. And I was in line for maybe some other orchestras, but never asked, and that was fine, some touring big bands. But I kept having to compare it with what I was doing in New Orleans. When I was at like 20 and 22, of course, I was playing with Ella, I was playing with Mel Torme, I was playing with Gladys Knight, I was playing bass trombone, I was playing tenor trombone, I was playing classical trombone, I was playing jazz trombone. I was writing charts for big bands, I was writing charts for small groups. I was teaching privately. I was not teaching full-time at any institution, but I was teaching privately. And I thought, if I go on the road, I mean, I did my homework as you would, like if I go on the road, I get paid X dollars. I have to spend X dollars for all of my room and board on the road, because that's not covered. And then I have to do only pretty much one, maybe two things. If I get hired on tenor trombone, then I'll be playing tenor trombone and maybe doing some writing. I won't have time to do this, 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 and this. At the time, there was no internet. There was no email. So you were lucky if you could fax from the road. You certainly weren't going to, and phone calls were ridiculously expensive. And so if I wanted to get into my career of full-time teaching, which I was already eyeing by the time I was in mid-20s, by that point, it's like, I'm going to be taking myself kind of out of communication. Plus, I loved doing all this stuff. I was also, back in that day, I was writing articles, as you know, and I was publishing things. And I thought, do I want to give up doing 12 things for doing 2 things? And for me, it wasn't something I really wanted to give up. So I made that choice, right or wrong, but it certainly steered me for where I wanted to do, because I was fortunate that in New Orleans, I felt the road came to me. If I hadn't lived there, I would have had to have gone on the road to get a lot of those experiences. But I will hold up my experiences in New Orleans to almost anyone's road experience and say, I got a pretty good taste of it.
Very interesting. You surely did. Not bad for a name dropper either.
Thanks. Well, you forced that issue.
Okay, let's switch gears now and talk about your program at Virginia Commonwealth. It's very highly regarded.
Thank you.
Share with us some of the details of that program that you're most proud of.
Well, it comes down, I think, to faculty, students, and location. We have great faculty. We have adjuncts here, some who have taught for 30 years here, and I've only been here for 20 years. We have adjuncts who have been hired just this year who are making a real difference, like Eric Wheeler, who is an electric and upright bassist from the DC and New York areas we just hired. And Tommy Hairston, who is teaching history of hip hop here and is going to expand things. And last 2 years ago, we hired Felipe Letao, a Brazilian who is teaching basically film scoring and working with DAWs, the digital audio workshop opportunities. And so we have this mix of faculty who have been here for decades and faculty who are coming in and bringing in fresh ideas. We have one of the things that I think really brought me from Northwestern, where I had a tenured position before I came here in 2001, I gave that up to come here, was that as wonderful as Northwestern is, and it's an acclaimed school, but its location is not known for a lot of hotbed places for students to play. They can't really do a lot of gigging in Evanston. There's some things. And if they go into Chicago, they have to compete with the real estate of Chicago musicians who may not want to give up all of that turf. They might let you sit in, but they want those gigs. Here in Richmond, my students gig all the time. And even in the COVID era right now, they're doing some gigging, outdoors in particular. And so my students here have what I had in New Orleans. And that I thought was an irreplaceable part of a good jazz education, and frankly, a jazz education that many students use as a springboard to play popular music of all kinds of music. I mean, how can you study jazz and popular influenced music without getting out and playing that in front of people? So there are places where you can do that at a higher cost of living. Your New Yorks, your LAs, maybe even Miami in that regard is probably a higher cost of living than Richmond. Even New Orleans now, as much as I love New Orleans, has a higher cost of living than Richmond, Virginia. And so my students can come here at an affordable level and they can learn inside the school, go out and play, and we get this circular school without walls, school without borders, where they go out and they play and they come back and they realize, Garcia's not lying to me. I got to get this stuff together in the classroom or else I'm going to get embarrassed again if I, when I go out to play. So this school without walls at an affordable location is something that really has made it very unusual, because Richmond, I like to say, has more art per square inch than any town its size, including New Orleans. There's more kinds of music involved, and then there's all the other kinds of arts, your dance, your theater, your visual arts, etc. It's all here. And that gives my students a chance to be really involved and get that experience while they're freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, and not just seniors and then graduating. And then we have a unique, I think, a reasonably unique spin here in that in teaching the roots of jazz, we know that jazz history has often been tied to not only the stories of racism and inequality and then social justice and healing, but continues to be a vehicle for expressing those concerns and the path to healing. And we're here in Richmond, Virginia, the former capital of the Confederacy, and you may have heard it pops up in the news now and then. And, so it's impossible for us not to address the fact that playing jazz is not just finding a bunch of notes that fit well over the chords, and not a bunch of chords that fit well over a groove, and not just a groove that sounds hip. It's a means to express oneself. And so what are you going to say and how are you going to say it? And in jazz, many of our icons have chosen to express issues of racism and inequality and social justice and finding a path to healing. And so in Richmond, we at VCU, we really focus a good deal of our artistic presentation on that. So yes, we do it within the classroom, but we have an annual Jazz for Justice concert that raises money not only for jazz scholarships, but for pro bono legal help in the community. And we've had Salsa for Social Change, and we have had a 3-year exchange with the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, South Africa, which was founded by our mutual friend, Darius Brubeck, where our students and faculty went back and forth, their students to us to them, between South Africa and here, studying issues of racial inequality and healing and how this affects the music and how it affects your community. And because of that, our students, I feel, play music with a more vested, soulful understanding of what jazz is than if we simply taught chords and scales and improvisation. I'm not necessarily implying that anyone else is just teaching that, but I am saying that Richmond, because of its history, has a unique springboard from which to explore this issue And because of some of the initiatives we've taken here and abroad with that, we have broadened that to a way that we can really expose to our students that jazz is not just a bunch of notes. And so I think that's helped make us unique over the years. And it certainly made me very proud to be associated with the jazz program here.
And rightfully so. It's it's a wonderful program. And now a lot of people know about it that maybe didn't before.
Thank you.
We also know that you've been very involved with organizations, and your participation with GEN, the Midwest Clinic, and IAJE are well known. Share with our viewers the importance of these organizations and in the jazz scene today. What's going on?
Well, it's critical. I mean, and for those of us who have been around for a while, we only have to point to the couple of years in between the demise of beloved IAJE and the rise of beloved Jazz Education Network, when we didn't have, for instance, a jazz association specifically, to realize that void and what we had lost and what we wanted back. These organizations, including the Midwest Clinic, are all opportunities, of course, for us to learn, and they're opportunities for us to rejoin our community and to regain energy. I think that it's great timing that most of these conferences take place in December, January, because we need refueling by that point. We've expended so much energy in the fall semester, and we need to go get energized and get some new ideas and come back in January to hit the ground running. And these organizations do that. I have to say that these organizations have benefited me far more than I've been able to give to them. You know, I mean, I've certainly served in these organizations in various ways, but you know, when I first started back in '87 as a full-time teacher, I remember Jeff Wagner, who was an educator at Hinsdale South High School, called me in my first couple of months at the office at Northern Illinois University and said, so-and-so tells me you're new in town. I said, yep. He said, good, you're the new secretary of Illinois NAJE. I said, what? He said, yeah, you need to figure out what's going on. You're drafting. So, I started taking notes and learning about what was going on in Illinois, and I had to send those into the national office. And I was one of the few secretaries who was sending minutes into the national office. They would read them, and I had a certain sense of humor, and they would appreciate that, and they would get the information. Later, so I had a forced reason to meet all these educators in Illinois when I would go to conferences and say, oh, I heard about you doing this or whatever. I could learn from them. And then in the national level, when it turned out that eventually they needed a new editor for the journal, well, one of the persons they'd regularly gotten writing samples from was me. And they knew I was interested in NAJE, later IAJE, and they knew that I was coming to the conferences, and I would write constructive letters to thank you to the organization and say, I love the conference. By the way, I've noticed a few things that you might not have been able to see. Maybe these are areas we can improve. Let me know how I can help, etc. So that became a window into getting involved with the national. And as an editor for the national organization, later international, it gave me a reason to go up to people who had changed my life and say thank you. I had a reason to go up to Bob Brookmeyer or to Jerry Mulligan or to Bill Holman or whomever and say, I'm Tony Garcia, I'm the editor of the Jazz Journal. Thank you for changing my life. By the way, we would love to interview you, or we'd love to have you say something that you would like to say, etc. So the impact, same thing at the Midwest Clinic. I joined seemingly almost by serendipity. I didn't expect to join the board. I was asked and honored to do so and join you on the board. And the opportunity to co-host and meet so many great educators and artists and meet the industry professionals and have a reason to reach out to them to get past whatever shyness I had and say, thank you, and what can we do to move this forward is tremendous. So now that in this particular, COVID era, Midwest will be presenting online. So there's no reason why anyone can't attend, because even if it's not live, when they attend, they can still archivally attend for the next 2 months. I just saw an email from a video from Sean Jones announcing that the GEN conference will be broadcast, remotely from Louisville, Kentucky this year. And so anyone can be able, you don't have any transportation or food costs to attend these conferences. These are tremendous opportunities for all of us to not only reconnect with our community and get some electricity for the new year, but to say thank you to people and to learn from that, because all of us, we're just continuing students. That's what we're doing. And I can't speak strongly enough about how these institutions changed my life and made it for the better, and made so many important, valuable personal friends, such as you and Jackie, for example, and meeting Bob and his wife. I mean, these are just tremendous things that if I just sat in the classroom, would never have happened.
I agree, Tony. And I think essential is the word that I would use when talking to a young educator who's just breaking in. I think it's essential that they belong to the organizations and attend.
And to music education students who are not yet active in the maybe team. But there's no better time to build your network. There's no better time to start learning. There's no better time to be able to say thank you to people who have inspired you. And and usually the student rates for these conferences is ridiculously low. And now that they're virtual for this year, how could you possibly not go?
Exactly. Well, it's been wonderful in my lifetime, and as you have said in yours, to watch the organizations participate and grow. And once again, it's helped to consolidate this jazz community that we're a part of. So it's as I said, essential.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the COVID-19 thing has really been a surprise and a eye opener. What can you just briefly tell us what you're doing in VCU with that situation?
Yeah, well, first of all, if you'd asked me a couple of months ago, and I think you did, I would have said, we're not going to have any ensembles. I mean, I didn't think it was even going to be possible. But in between, we've had various studies, medical and musical, from overseas and from the United States that have allowed us to study the science and the data. So first thing is that even though the decision may not be up to the music educator, if it is up to the music educator, there are protocols that I believe allow us to do it. So to my shock and pleasure, we've had, since mid-August, we've had our jazz ensembles. We have 2 big bands rehearsing. We have 4 of our 5 combos are live, 1 is virtual. But all the bells are bagged brass bells are bagged in 210 denier nylon or polyester bags. All the saxophone bags are saxophone instruments are similarly bagged and with elastic straps around, the handholds, etc. Everyone's wearing masks when they're not physically playing at that moment. All the instruments are 6 to 9 feet apart. Our big band is actually rehearsing in a box formation facing each other, trumpets, bones, saxes, rhythm. But, we're like 60 feet apart, but it sure beats April when we couldn't play at all. So, I'm not particularly interested in playing the fastest bebop tune right now, but at 60 feet apart, as opposed to our usual setup, which would like fit on the Village Vanguard stage like we should. But we're making music, and if it holds up, we should be able to have a live stream concert in a couple of weeks. And so the first thing is just, if it is up to the educator to study the science and see what's possible. And if anyone wants to email me at ajgarcia@vcu.edu and ask for the studies and links and information, I'll be happy to send that. And of course, the science will continue evolving. But I have to say, even though mathematically anything could change at any moment, we have not had a single big band or combo member come down with COVID. I've had a kid had strep throat. I got a kid a couple of bad colds. These are always happening every fall. But this is, to me, an amazing thing. So that's the first thing. But if you are in an all remote scenario, such as I was in April and May and March, mid-March, there's so many things that can still be done. First, of course, is listening, which is always there. So guided listening, here's this track from Miles or from Sonny Rollins or from the Basie Band. Let's listen from this part to this part. What are we listening for? Let's check this out. How can we steal this for our own playing or expression? So listening is the most important step, and that's never changed. And with Zoom, of course, it's just as easy or easier to share audio and video to make that happen. Issues of time feel, aside from listening, what's more important in jazz than a great time feel? So studying listening of that, but also working with a metronome on clicking on 2 and 4 and working on great swing feel as an individual or a soloist or in a passage, and recording brief audio that you can send to your teacher and your teacher can evaluate and send back. All my students for years now, regardless of COVID, every student in my jazz band has video tests where they have to scat sing passages for me from letter B to letter D in this piece. You need to scat with the metronome on 2 and 4. Not the pitches, just great phrasing, articulation, timing, breathing, all the cutoffs, etc. email it to me by this date. We've been doing that for years, regardless of COVID. So then when we get together with the instruments, we're playing well, because the opposite is, like I like to say, if you can't sing it well, adding instruments just makes the problem several $1,000s louder. So we solve all this, you know, through scat singing and video tests. Thematic development, you can study it through listening, and then, you know, doing exercises through Zoom where take a 3 or 4 note idea, play it a different way, play it another different way. Now play it over this chord change. Now make it work over this chord change. Thematic development is great. Singing along with the great jazz masters. You know, sing along with Miles, sing along with Sonny Rollins, learn the phrasing, sing along with a Count Basie shout. Singing along with it is irreplaceable. Transcribing rhythms, even if it's just 4 bars, you know, transcribe 4 bars of this Miles solo, transcribe 4 bars of this bass solo, and learn, because if you can transcribe it, you can visualize it. If you can visualize it, you can read it better. If you can read it better, you're now a better sight reader. So transcribing rhythms is endless. And then of course, there's the whole world of multi-tracking, and it can be simple, because I know that there are people out there doing wonderful things with the whole big band tracking and all that. I haven't done that. We could do it, we might do it, but any tracking is useful. So I have a student in high school who's working with me remotely. He doesn't even live in town. And he's multi-tracking Bach chorales from the bottom up, you know, play the bass trombone part, play the third, play the second, then play the first. But you can do just a great trombone section of anything, for instance, if you're a trombonist, and make tremendous progress. Back when I was in college in I would record using a Wurlitzer piano. I would record ideas for saxophone solis that I'd written out because I wanted to hear them. So I'd put 5 saxophone parts, one at a time, on the keyboard at slow tempo. I would track 5 of them and I'd speed it up then, you know, to the right speed. There was a world of hiss on those recordings. It made no difference. I learned tons of stuff. So educators shouldn't be worried about whether or not the kids are using high quality audio to multi-track. You don't have to make it public. Tracking teaches you a lot about timing, intonation, phrasing, articulation. So, you know, those are just a few things. And then of course, the kids can actually play along with a play along, and they can send that to the teacher, and the teacher can critique. I've done things where I've played along with a play along, left gaps for the students to respond to me, like trading 4s or 8s with nothing in the 4s or the 8s for them to play back to me, so that they can then track that and send it back to me. And they've been inspired not just by the rhythm section, but by having some soloist to play and trade with. And so that's pretty simple to do. And matter of fact, I've released now some videos of me doing that with myself and with other artists. So if anyone watching Google's, in quotes, the I Remember You project, they will see some videos. About 4 of them are out now. I've got about 4 or 5 more in the can, and where I'm, you know, on video soloing with myself, but then soloing with like Wycliffe Gordon, or soloing with my father-in-law, Al Herman, or future. I have one in the can from Ingrid Jensen, the great trumpet player. And these are just virtual duets that anybody could do. I happen to do it visually, but you can do it audio. So these are just, this will not stop jazz. We will continue learning all music and all jazz, and we can do it even in the COVID era.
Tony, thank you for sharing. That's a wealth of information. It's about 2 books worth of teaching the way that the masters do it.
Well, we're all scrambling, so we just have to jump in and do it.
That's right, and we are. So let's have you talk about the music, the jazz music. Can you give us an idea of some of your favorite jazz tunes, and then would you please play something for us?
Oh, sure. I'm an omnivore, so I like a whole lot of different jazz tunes. I love beautiful ballads like Body and Soul. I love Afro-Cuban tunes like Night in Tunisia, and I love tunes that go back and forth like I Remember April. I love great Brazilian tunes, and Meditation, and 1,000 others. I love bebop tunes. You know, I mean, there's something in the whole intricacy of them, and yet trying to make them sound as comfortable as talking, that I just love that push-pull. And I love that. I mentioned I Remember You and the solo projects I've been doing there. So, I mean, there's just so many great tunes. And I should mention that, and just briefly, that there's 13 of my favorite tunes I put into a book about improv using just key centers instead of chord symbols. as your primary approach. And that book I just happened to have here in beautiful purple, and it's called Cutting the Changes. It's published by Chose. But if you open it up and you get to the first tune, it's Grow My Custom to Your Face, I think it is, and it's a bossa nova. It's got a backing track, and you open it up and there are no chord changes. There's the melody and there's the lyrics, but you get to the solo section and the first thing it says is, hey, it's an E flat, blow, see you later. And you realize that actually that's exactly what happens on the bandstand. And then later you can get deeper in the book and you learn about the key centers within the tune. And then later you can learn about the chord changes within the tune. But one of the things I've learned from my own experience is that even though some rising musicians are able to learn jazz from chord scale up, micro to macro, most mere mortals such as myself learn a lot better from macro to micro. What key is it in and how far can I play in it before somebody throws a cymbal at me like they threw Charlie Parker's cymbal? So, you know, a lot of tunes you can start with 1 or 2 major scales and get a long way. So those tunes I love too, and I put 13 of them in that book that are from standard tune composers.
Terrific, terrific. So let's hear it, my man.
Oh, you want some playing? Okay, so here's a nice cold trombone. You're a trombonist by default, so you know the joy of picking up a cold mouthpiece. Okay, so there's a title that would be good for the COVID era. Don't get round much anymore. Maybe we should try that. So I'll play a little bit. I'll play a couple of choruses of that, and I'll play part of it with a plunger because I am from New Orleans, and this is my favorite mute. This mute has been around. This is my longest owned musical piece of equipment, I think. This is from the 70s, from Ace Hardware. It has a lovely shine to it. I highly recommend Ace Hardware as a purveyor of fine plunger mutes. And before I play, I'll say one more thing, and then I'll try to not to embarrass myself playing on a cold trombone. That is that in New Orleans, you don't play the trombone or the clarinet. You play the trombone and the clarinet. There's a first syllable emphasis on these. You play the trombone, the clarinet, and the keyboard, you know, but you know, you play up north, you might play the trombone and the clarinet. So I'm going to play some of this like the trombone and some of it like the trombone. We'll see what comes out. Ooh, it is cold.
Yeah, man, that's the big. All right, I heard
Thanks.
trombone and trombone.
I feel better just playing a little bluesiness.
Oh, that was beautiful, Tony.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. And let me say at this point too, all of these things that you've been describing through the interview, we're going to put in the credits
Thank you very much.
at the end of the interview, so people can contact you and also find a lot of these products that you've had. So thank you so very much for being with us today. I am sure that your words will carry big impact to the jazz educators, students, and fans that are listening. And we look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Well, thank you very much.
My friend.
Very grateful to both you and to Bob for all you've done for me and for music education through the years, music in general, and I look forward to more in the future.
Great.
Thank you, Tony. To our viewers, we appreciate you joining us today and for being a part of Jazz Zone Together. We hope you found the presentation of real value. We hope you'll join us for future episodes. In the meantime, please stay safe and please keep making music.